Section 12 of the Science History of the Universe, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Owen Patrick. The Science History of the Universe, Volume 2. Edited by Francis Rolt Wheeler. Geology. Chapter 6. Composition of the Earth, Part 2. Having considered the composition of the atmosphere, sea, and solid crust, the general features of the Earth's surface require attention. The late Professor Dana of Yale briefly summarizes the important physical features of the Earth in his textbook of Geology, wherein he says, "The Earth has a circumference of 24,899 miles. Its form is that of a sphere flattened at the poles, the equatorial diameter, 7,926 miles, being about 26 2/3 miles greater than the polar diameter. About 8/11ths of the Earth's surface, or 144 million square miles, is depressed below the rest and occupied by the sea. This sunken part of the crust is called the oceanic basin, and the large areas of land are called the continents or continental plateaus. The area of dry land is about 52,745,000 square miles. Nearly 3/4 of the land is situated in the northern hemisphere, and very nearly 3/5 of the oceanic basin is in the southern hemisphere. The dry land may be said to be grouped about the North Pole, and to stretch southward in two masses, an oriental, including Europe, Asia, Africa, and Australasia, and an occidental, including North and South America. The ocean is gathered in a similar manner about the South Pole, and extends northward in two broad areas separating the Occident and Orient, namely, the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, and also in a third, the Indian Ocean, separating the southern prolongations of the Orient, namely Africa and Australasia. The Orient is made, by this arrangement, to have two southern prolongations, while the Occident, or America, has but one. This double feature of the Orient accords with its great breadth, for it averages 6,000 miles from east to west, which is far more than twice the mean breadth of the Occident, 2,200 miles. The inequality of the two continental masses has its parallel in the inequality of the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, for the former, 6,000 miles broad, is more than double the average breadth of the latter, 2,800 miles. The northern portion of the Orient, or Europe and Asia combined, make one continental area, Eurasia. Its general course is east and west. The northern portion of the Occident, North America, is elongated from north to south. The mean depth of the oceanic depression is about 14,000 feet, and the mean height of the land, according to Murray, 2,252 feet. The greatest depth reached by soundings south of the Friendly Islands is 30,930 feet. The greatest height on the land, Mount Everest of the Himalayas, is 29,000 feet. Hence, the interval between the extremes of altitude and depression is over 11 miles. If the continental plateaus and the floor of the ocean were graded to a common level, the ocean would still have a depth of about 10,000 feet. The mean height of Europe is 939 feet, Asia 3,189 feet, Africa 2,021 feet, Australia 805 feet, North America 1,888 feet, South America 2,078 feet. The mean depth of the great oceans are of the North Atlantic 15,000 feet, North Pacific 16,000 feet, South Atlantic and South Pacific, and probably the Indian Ocean about 13,000 feet. The form of the ocean's bed has been fairly accurately determined. From north to south, along the middle of the Atlantic, there is a wide zigzag ridge or plateau, conforming nearly in trend to the American coast. It lies at a depth of 6,000 to 12,000 feet, while on either side the bottom slopes away to depths mostly between 15,000 and 20,000 feet. In the area of 4,000 fathoms and over, situated north of the island of Puerto Rico, the United States Coast Survey steamer Blake found in 1883 a depth of 27,366 feet. This greatest depth and large areas of deep water exist in the western part of the ocean. In the Pacific Ocean, a shallow area extends with little interruption from the Malay Archipelago southeastward beyond the Paumotu Islands, and thence northeastward to the Isthmus of Panama, southeastward to Patagonia, and southward to the Antarctic. The deepest parts of this ocean also are in its western half. One deep area is east of Japan, another south of the Ladrones, others near the Friendly Islands. Northward in the northern hemisphere, the ocean shallows rapidly. The depth in the Bering Strait is not over 150 feet, and between Great Britain and Iceland it does not exceed 6,000 feet and is mostly under 3,000 feet. The ocean's bottom has no steep ridges like those of ordinary mountain scenery, but broad elevations exist in some parts, as found in the surroundings of the Tuscarora between the Hawaiian Islands and Japan. Besides these, there are many mountain ranges rising somewhat abruptly from the depths, having the islands of the ocean as their summits, which rival in length those of the continents. The Hawaiian range, if the coral islands in the line of the volcanic islands are included, has a length of 2,000 miles, and it rises steeply from depths of 15,000 to 18,000 feet. The mountains of Hawaii have a height above the ocean of nearly 14,000 feet, and a depth of 17,000 feet was found but 50 miles south of the island, thus making the whole height nearly 31,000 feet. The islands of the tropical Pacific have together an island chain about 5,000 miles long, and they are the tops of a mountain chain of this great length. Along the oceanic borders, the sea is often, for a long distance out, quite shallow, because the continents continue on underwater with a nearly level surface. Then comes, usually at a depth of about 100 fathoms or 600 feet, a rather sudden slope to the deep bed of the ocean. This is a case off the eastern coast of the United States, east and south of New England. Off New Jersey, the deep water begins along a line about 80 miles from the shore. Off Virginia, this line is 50 to 60 miles at sea, and thus it gradually approaches the coast to the southward, while to the northward it continues 80 to 100 miles off from the New England coast, and passes far outside of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. The slope of the bottom for the 80 miles off New Jersey is only 1 foot in 700 feet. The true boundary between the continental plateau and the oceanic depression is the commencement of the abrupt slope. The same abrupt slope near the 100-fathom line exists in the Gulf of Mexico. The British Islands are situated on a submerged portion of the European continent and are essentially a part of that continent, the limit of the oceanic basin, the 100-fathom line, being 50 to 100 miles outside of Scotland and Ireland and extending south around the Bay of Biscay. West of the English Channel, the depth increases, in a distance of only 10 miles, from 100 fathoms to 2,000. New Guinea, in a similar way, is proved to be a part of Australia. Such facts occur on most coasts, and they teach that the oceanic depression is generally separated from the continental plateaus by a well-defined outline. The surface of the continent comprises plains or lowlands, plateaus or tablelands, and mountain ridges. The mountain ridges may rise either from the lowlands or the plateaus. The plateaus are large areas of approximately level surface at an altitude of 1,000 feet or more above the sea. They are often part of the great mountain chains, lying between the ridges, or forming the mountain mass out of which the ridges rise. For example, the regions of northern and southern New York are plateaus, the former averaging 1,500 feet in height, the latter 2,000 feet, situated on the western borders of the Appalachian chain. And the same is true of the Cumberland tableland in Tennessee. Between the Sierra Nevada and the Wasatch, there is a plateau of vast extent called the Great Basin, having the Great Salt Lake in its northeastern portion. Its height above the sea averages 4,000 feet. The Humboldt Mountains and other ranges rise out of it. It continues northward into British America and southward into Mexico. The eastern part of New Mexico, with the western part of Texas, is a plateau of about the same elevation, called the Llano Estacado. The desert of Gobi, between the Altai and the Kunlun Range, is a desert plateau about 4,000 feet high, while the plateau of Tibet, between the Kunlun Range and the Himalayas, is 11,500 to 13,000 feet above the sea. Persia and Armenia constitute another plateau. These examples are sufficient to explain the use of the term. The continents are constructed on a common model. They have high borders and a low center, and are, accordingly, basin-shaped. North America has the Appalachians on the eastern border, the Cordillera on the west, and between these the low Mississippi Basin. South America, in a similar manner, has the Andes on the west, the Brazilian Mountains on the east, and other heights along the north, with the low region of the Amazon and La Plata making up the larger part of the great interior. In the Orient, there are mountains on the Pacific side, others on the Atlantic, and, again, the Himalayas on the south face the Indian Ocean, and the Altai Mountains face the Arctic seas. Between the Himalayas, or rather the Kunlun Mountains, which are just north, and the Altai lies the plateau of Gobi, which is low compared with the enclosing mountains, and farther west there are the lowlands of the Caspian and Aral, the Caspian lying even below the level of the ocean. The Urals divide the 6,000 miles of breadth into two parts, and so give Europe some little title to its designation as a separate continent. West of their meridian, there are again extensive lowlands over middle and southeastern European Russia. In Africa, there are mountains on the eastern border and on the western border south of Guinea. There are also the Atlas Mountains along the Mediterranean and the Kong Mountains along the Guinea coast, and the interior is relatively low, although mostly 1,000 to 2,000 feet in elevation. In Australia, also, there are highlands on the eastern and western borders, and the interior is low. All the continents are, therefore, constructed on the basin-like model. There is a second great truth with regard to the continental reliefs. The highest border faces the largest ocean. Each of the continents sustains the truth announced. North America has its great mountains, the Cordillera, on the side of the great ocean, the Pacific, and its small mountains, the Appalachians, on the side of the small ocean. South America also has its highest border on the west. The Orient has high ranges of mountains on the east, or the Pacific side, and the lower ranges, as those of Norway and other parts of Europe, on the west, and the Himalayas face the great Indian Ocean, while the smaller Altai Range faces a small northern ocean. In Africa, the mountains on the side of the Indian Ocean are higher than those on that of the Atlantic. In Australia, the highest border is on the Pacific side, for the South Pacific fronting East Australia is greater than the Indian Ocean fronting West Australia. Hence, the basin-like shape before illustrated is that of a basin with one border much higher than the other, and with the highest border on the side of the largest ocean. The features described have a vast influence in adapting the continents for man. America has its highest borders in the far west, with all its great plains and great rivers inclined toward the Atlantic. For through the Gulf of Mexico, the whole interior, as well as the eastern border, has its natural outlet eastward. The Orient, instead of rising into the Himalayas on the Atlantic border, has its great heights in the remote east. and its vast plains, even those of Central Asia, have their natural outlet westward, over Europe and through the Mediterranean, or toward the same Atlantic Ocean. Thus, as Professor Guyot has said, the vast regions of the world, which are best fitted for man by their climate and productions, are combined into one great arena for the progress of civilization. End of section 12.